any heavy drinker can tell you, you wake up and you feel completely out of control. You know, you just feel like your head's going to explode. You have pins and needles, anxiety. You're so sensitive you can't even live in this world. And you have a double screwdriver in the morning, that you solve the problem like right away. By the time you get to the bottom of the glass, you're under control. Mm-hmm. So I would call that, and in fact at the time I did call that life-saving. Yeah. And then, of course, the progression of alcohol and alcoholism is well known to most people, so it's like people laugh at you when you say it's life-saving. I was vodka in the morning, life-saving. Well, if you experience it, you know why someone could say that. Yeah. But big picture, that's insane. So SSRIs sound like exactly the same phenomenon.
It is. I mean, on multiple levels, I think, they make you ignore the real problems, which fester and get worse, and could actually push you eventually towards becoming suicidal. And two, I think they disrupt your brain chemistry over time and actually make you more likely to be depressed and develop other issues.
I just can't believe that basically the entire weight of the American medical establishment, the regulatory bodies, some of the biggest publicly traded companies in the world are all basically prescribing vodka to desperate people.
It sounds crazy, and
it honestly does sound crazy.
And people are going to listen to this and they're going to say,
you're wrong. That sounds
but the beauty of it,
they would
and the
never.
reason I feel so good about having this conversation is that it's provable. You don't have to guess because we have the outcomes. Mm-hmm. Right? So the two numbers as a layman that seem relevant to me, doses prescribed, suicide rate. Like, that just seems like a pretty big picture way to measure success. More people are killing themselves as you've got more prescriptions for this garbage. It's at very least not working. Can we say that? I mean, that seems logical.
I think it makes sense when you look at that on a population level, but I also think it makes sense intuitively for a lot of people. With nearly 15 to 20% of people being on these medications, everyone knows someone who's on these drugs. Yeah. In their family, in their social circle. Just look, how are they doing? Are these people thriving? A lot of the times, the stories that I hear is, that person's not doing that great. They've slowly gotten worse over time. You can look at it at a population level. This issue is so common. People actually see this in their real life, in the people that they know.
Have you ever spoken to someone who had numb genitals or no sex drive?
Yeah, I've spoken to probably 20 to 30 of them.
What do they say? What's that like?
It's like they wake up in a horror movie. I think about a woman, and I interviewed her, and from my recollection, she got on one of these medications, beautiful young woman, and she ended up developing PTSD. She told the doctor that it had happened to her, and she became incredibly distressed. What is happening to me?
Her sex drive just gone.
Sex drive gone, cognitive damage, emotional blunting. It completely disassociated from her family, from her emotions, and disconnected from her life. The doctor involuntarily hospitalized her, saying that she was delusional and that she had health anxiety, and tried to pressure her onto antipsychotic medication because they simply could not accept that this had happened. They managed to briefly turn her family against her and just say, she's wrong, she's delusional, she has another psychiatric condition. And so she ends up in a psychiatric hospital. Talk about a horror show. You get put on a medication that's meant to help you. It destroys your nervous system, and then a doctor involuntarily hospitalizes you and turns your family against you. These people literally wake up in a horror show. I spoke to another person in India.
Is the doctor still practicing?
Oh yeah, they're still practicing. And this is not isolated. I spoke to.
Why is that person not in jail?
He's a top dealer. He got a new corner, dude.
That's so cruel. That's criminal, in my opinion. So
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't interrupt you. I'm gonna be mad again. You spoke to someone in India?
The same thing happened. Yeah, because doctors they've never heard of this condition before, and it just seems like too crazy to be true. How could these life-saving drugs do something like this? And the same thing happened. He ended up being involuntarily hospitalized. This young man for months. when it was turned against him, he kept on trying to tell them that this had happened to him, and it took them months to let him out. And so yeah, it's about the worst thing that I could ever imagine happening to someone, and they lose people all the time. The suicide rate's out of control in this population.
So, a doctor who refuses to see the obvious and is committed knowingly or not to a lie, it seems to me to be likely in a case like this to prescribe a drug on top of the drug that it clearly caused.
Yeah.
The symptoms he's trying to treat, right?
Yeah.
What happens when you do that? A lot of these patients seem like they're on all kinds of different drugs. How do they interact with each other? What's the effect of that?
Yeah, it's awful, right? You have someone who's highly distressed for legitimate reasons with a totally messed up nervous system, and you just throw them on an antipsychotic. So now they're kind of like blunted and even more dulled, dealing with the same problem.
So if these drugs can eliminate your sexual response, numb your genitals for life, drive you to suicide, is it possible that they have other sexual side effects?
Well, having spoken to some of these PTSD sufferers, I've had two men, heterosexual men, tell me that they started to question their sexuality because of all of the blunting that was done. These were men who were having encounters with women, and they were just saying, I would find this person very arousing and attractive, and that's not happening anymore, and they start wondering whether they're gay. And so I think on that level, it can make people feel asexual, it can make people start to question their sexuality, which I've directly seen. And then the whole other issue, which is even more frightening, is the data that's coming out. It's some of the animal studies about what happens to mice who are exposed in utero to antidepressants. This has always been a question that people have been curious about. Is there, what are the effects of exposing a developing nervous system during this period of life where it goes from being like a speck to a fully formed brain in 9 months? These drugs freely cross the placenta. What is the effect on the development? They do, all of them do, yeah. All psychiatric drugs freely cross.
The mother's taking these drugs, the drugs are in the developing child.
Yes.
We know that.
Yeah, fact, yeah.
But no study's been done on what that means.
Well, there have been some studies, and so...
If you'll shut the fuck up, Tucker.
So there's a study in rats and mice, and what they find is that the mice who are exposed in utero, they grow up with a higher rate of autistic-like behaviors and also decreased sexual interest, so they mate less than the other mice. Now, you might be saying, hey, well, that's just mice, who knows if that happens to
Utopia.
I tell you what, I'm concerned enough about that already to worry about things. I don't need to see that human study, but we do have some studies in humans, and what they've found is, we have 12 MRI studies that have control for depression, which is essentially just a fancy way of making sure that depression isn't a factor, and they've looked at the brains, and they find that there's structural changes and functional changes in the brains of kids who are exposed versus those who are not exposed. They've then gone again and looked at this when the kids have become adolescents, and they've looked at their sensory processing. And the kids who were exposed growing up had altered sensory processing when they looked at the amygdala. It's a part of the brain that's responsible for high emotions, and those changes, they have correlated with worse mental health outcomes. So that's like a whole nother topic that I was recently at the FDA talking about this with some of my colleagues, that many women are not actually being told that there are real risks to your child if you take these medications when the nervous system is developing.
Are they prescribed to pregnant women?
It's 10% of pregnant. I think 9 or 10% of pregnant women are taking antidepressants.
There's been a massive increase in, sexual change of all kinds, in the way that people couple, in the way, literally in the way they have sex, in the outcome of our children who were born, and in self-identified sexual orientation. Massive increase in homosexuality, massive increase of mind-body
That's not a
no one seems interested in why.
It is.
Is it possible that
That's where
if
we
you've
go,
got 10% of the
good
population on these drugs, that
80-20.
there's a connection there?
I mean, I think that's something to be explored because, yes, you can make an argument, okay, the world is more accepting these days and maybe people are coming
That's
out.
not-
That's bullshit. The numbers are so high
It's not
that that's
very
not
great.
it.
But I'm looking
Ground
at these
either
animal,
or steak.
these animal data. I'm seeing changes in sexual interest in mice who are exposed growing up. I mean, we're putting kids who
Like a
are
10
6, 7, 8, who go through sexual maturity with their sex drive essentially blunted from these medications. I'm having people come to me and tell me that they're questioning their sexuality because they're not feeling attraction and arousal.
Right.
You connect the dots. I mean, it has to be playing a role.
Is there like
Pay
early
attention.
age study of this underway? Or does anyone
Heck the
say,
dots.
hey, wait a second, like you could change the future of humanity with this kind of stuff? This is like big consequences.
No, I mean, the NIMH has essentially been useless. I mean, all they do, from what I see, is they're essentially just looking for drug targets in the brain. They're not doing any research into side effects. They're not doing any studies comparing non-drug alternatives to drugs for the treatment of anxiety and depression. They are so captured and just obsessed with finding the next target to throw a drug at. I think the American public has been betrayed by the NIMH. I really do.
Well, it sounds like a lot of people have been killed. What about, going back to the question of side effects?
It's just a drug.
I don't think, every time you raise the question like, hey, it seems like a lot of the school shooters that we know about, except we know anything about a lot of them, they seem to be on
She's
drugs.
literally the like 5'4"
Is there any research into that? I don't know, say that
basketball
you
player,
should
high
like
school
down and say that.
superstar.
Why?
You know,
Ivy
we were
League.
talking for sure.
Ivy
you know,
League.
But
For asking that question.
yeah, for asking that question, yeah.
There weren't school shootings. You know, I mean, the biggest school shooting of like American history took place at the University of Texas. Chuck Whitman, who turns out he had a brain tumor, so there was a reason that happened. When the bell tower killed all these people. Then there was a lull, and then Columbine happens, and then there's like probably many reasons for this, but the increase in school shootings almost precisely coincides with this massive increase in prescription of these drugs. So, like, is anyone studying this?
Well, it's actually really hard to study, is the issue.
How's that?
I want to say this is, a topic, I don't think drugs are involved in all the school shootings. I do think there is a social contagion element to it. I do think if you look at the side effects of all of these medications, it's already in the label. If you look at
So as
stimulants,
he's trying
right
to
there it
figure
says it
out
can
how
cause aggression
he goes home.
and hostility. If you look at antipsychotics like Abilify, in the label it says it can cause aggression. If you look at the antidepressants, it also says it can cause mania and aggression and agitation. And
That's kind of the opposite of the intended effect, no?
well, what these things are paradoxical side effects. And so, and maybe an easy way to think about it is if there were 10 people in a room and they were smoking cannabis, you might have 9 people giggling and you have one person becoming paranoid. There's something just about that person's genetics and the way they respond to it that they have the opposite reaction.
Yes.
And so that can happen with psychiatric medications. And so these are rare side effects, but if you're putting 15% of the population on these drugs, rare side effects are going to happen. And so the next thing is, so we know these drugs can do this. Well, has this ever actually happened? And it has, because there have been lawsuits. For instance, there was one in the early 90s. It was the Tobin case. There was a gentleman called Don Shell who had a bad reaction to Paxil. He had a bad reaction, I think, to Prozac, and he was put on Paxil many years later. And shortly thereafter, he became incredibly homicidal, and he killed his wife, his daughter, and his granddaughter, and then shot himself. Now, the sons of surviving son-in-law, the husband of the daughter who killed, ended up bringing the suit against, I think it was SmithKline at the time, it wasn't GSK. They go to a jury trial and they win. It gets appealed and the appeal isn't successful and he ends up getting paid out. And so we have legal cases where jurors have listened to the evidence of these cases and said, if not for this drug, this awful murder-suicide wouldn't have happened. And so we know this happened from court cases, and there have been many other cases like this. You just never hear about them because you're not allowed to talk about this.
Why would this video be throttled for broaching this topic? I'm confused.
Well, because, the dominant narrative is essentially that school shootings are caused by guns. And if you were to...
I have a lot of those that's never occurred to me.
Yeah. And so that, it's...
You gotta be a little psycho to do that.
Stigmatizing. This is meant to be something
No matter
that
what
scares
you
people away from medication, and it doesn't fit the mold. Because if you were to accept that this can happen, even if this is a 1 in 2 million type side effect, that's still happening a couple of times a year, that people are becoming homicidal on these medications. And so I think people, they don't, you just can't say it. It's taboo.
It shouldn't be if you care about the murdered kids at, the schools.
But it's changing though, and this is like a silver lining here that will make people like me seem a lot less crazy, because through bipartisan support, the governor of Tennessee just instituted a new law mandating that following school shootings there needs to be an investigation into the use of psychiatric medication. It's the first state to actually try and get that data to look into it, because oftentimes it's redacted, the FBI has it, they don't give it to anyone, it's kind of like shoved away in a box. But in the state of Tennessee, with bipartisan support, they will now look at this for school shootings.
Could do. So you are, middle-aged person going through the middle-age, the litany of middle-age drama, and you find yourself sad, maybe even depressed, you go to the shrink, and you are prescribed drugs. What are the most commonly prescribed drugs? Which are the drugs you should be the most afraid of, assuming there's a difference?
I think the SSRIs, we've talked a lot about them, but the other class are benzodiazepines. These are awful drugs. They're usually used for anxiety and insomnia.
And what are the brand names on those?
Xanax, Klonopin, Valium, Clonazepam. Yeah.
Very common drugs in this country.
Really, their use is declining, but they're still quite common. The main issue with them is that they feel good. And I know we were talking about this before, and you had mentioned taking them. I've taken them. It's almost like immediate.
I took one in high school. I never took another one because it was the most profound. They solve all your problems in like 4 minutes.
So super addictive, right? To have something like that on hand. But the real problem with the benzos is when it comes to coming off of them, they can be incredibly difficult to stop. And
What's that mean, difficult to stop?
Because they have such a potent sort of anxiety reducing and insomnia, and sleep reducing effect, when you come off of them, your anxiety goes through the roof and you develop severe insomnia. Some people even die from coming off benzodiazepines. It's so jarring to the brain. And because of that, people can get trapped on the drug. Every time they try and come off of it, it's so uncomfortable that they have to go back on. And they can also develop another condition called protracted withdrawal.
20 minutes.
And so some people
Exactly.
who have been on this medication for years and they try to come off, they develop a kind of a brain injury. And so they take themselves off the medication too quickly, and they go into a severe withdrawal, and the symptoms never stop. They end up with ringing in their ears, light sensitivity, cognitive impairment, severe anxiety, burning in their hands and feet.
Oh, come on.
Yeah, themselves. They go, I'm just in withdrawal. I've been white knuckling through this for the last couple of months. I'm just going to start the drug again. I don't want to deal with this anymore. I'll find another way to come off. They start the drug again. It doesn't go away. And this is
where the symptoms don't go away.
Symptoms don't go away. And these are the patients that I actually treat in my practice. I'd say probably 70% of the people I work with now have neurological damage from coming off benzodiazepines and SSRI medications too quickly. Thankfully, it actually has it's awful. It has a decent prognosis. Most people recover from it within 2 years, but for many people it can be 2 years of severe disability.
Sometimes there's little bits of bone in this, so it's also good not to mix that with the ground beef.
Multiple days a week.
Steak.
People who have brain damage from coming off these medications too quickly. Now, again, I know most people haven't heard about this before, so they're going to be listening to this and saying, this is crazy. How could I have never heard that?
They like us, they care about us.
Read the drug labels in the US. Every single benzodiazepine has a section in there that talks about the risk of protracted withdrawal.
So what does that look like? So describe, obviously, anonymously, but like the experience of one of your patients.
So the experience of one of my patients is, it's so bad. You were living your life one day, you decide to come off a medication, and then before you know it, your whole life is turned upside down. Your brain, you are gripped with severe anxiety and obsessive, dark thoughts that just torment you all the time. You never have a moment of rest or relaxation. You simply cannot relax. Some people feel so keyed up that they pace incessantly in circles. It's a condition called akathisia.
For real.
They cannot stop moving. They become social recluses because they cannot go out in public because it's too bright, it's too noisy. The nervous system is like a snail without shell. Even interacting with people in the shopping centre can cause surges in adrenaline. People have severe neuropathic pain when their feet burn, and it destroys families. People become disabled. People take their lives frequently, and this is, I know I mentioned before about PSSD being like the biggest story going on, but this would be just as big, honestly. There are probably millions of people who are suffering from protracted withdrawal from benzos or SSRIs. Thankfully, this has actually been picked up a lot by major news outlets recently, but this condition has and it does kill people.
How long do you have to be on benzos or SSRIs to develop physical dependency and to get these kind of withdrawal symptoms?
So most people it's several years, and then it's triggered by coming off the medication.
Several years?
Yeah.
Is there any evidence it's a good idea to put someone on SSRIs or benzos for years?
No, there isn't. But I do want to say I have had some people develop this much quicker than several years, like within taking the medication for a few months, things like that. That's much less common. Usually the way it happens is you're on it for several years, 5 years, decades, you come off too quickly.
Decades?
Yeah, that's really common.
You've seen that?
Yeah.
Decades. What is the doctor thinking?
When they put them on these drugs, decades.
Well, if someone's coming back to get a script filled, after 15, 20 years of taking one of these drugs, does no one pause to say,
business.
You just take your brain's not designed for that, right?
Yeah, they think that they have.
I get no salesman.
We're getting a little technical. I want to go here because I think it's important. So when a drug comes onto the market, there's a study called a relapse prevention study. This is essentially the rationale for leaving people on these drugs indefinitely. And so I think it's important to talk a bit about the design of these studies because it's so it's so telling. It's essentially a drug company will get a group of people and they'll put them on the drug for, like, say, 6 months. And so you have 500 people on the drug for 6 months. 250, you then, this is actually how the study is designed. 250 people, at a certain point, they continue the drug, and the other 250, they rapidly stop it. And so they pull them off the drug either immediately or at the longest about 2 weeks. And then they watch what happens to those two groups over time. And they're looking for how many people become depressed in the two groups. With the thinking being, well, if the patients who continue the drug become less depressed, then that means it works. But the issue with these studies is that it completely ignores the fact that people develop withdrawal. And so if you stick a bunch of people on this drug for 6 months and then you stop it immediately or within 2 weeks, they are going to develop withdrawal symptoms. That will look like depression.
It's working.
And so the study is flawed. It's majorly flawed. It's embarrassing that the FDA even allows this and that doctors even believe this is a rationale for keeping people on these medications. And that's it. And that is the study that lets doctors feel good about filling these drugs up again and again and again, because they say, oh, we're preventing relapse because this poorly designed study that makes no sense, that is honestly just embarrassing even to believe in, showed that when you rapidly pull people off the medication, there was more depressive relapse, which really it wasn't. It was just withdrawal. And so just even at the heart of it is just bad science and faulty studies.
I mean, even I, as a non-scientist, can understand the gaps in the logic there. It seems pretty obvious. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm fixated on the worldview that allows this to persist. Like, how would you have to feel about other people to allow this kind of stuff to happen? And
they don't matter, Chuck.
When you were doing your training as a doctor for whatever, 6 or 8, 10 years ago, did you get a sense that other doctors...
They tell you straight up in undergrad,
like the human soul,
caring about people is not going to be
or
enough.
is there a sense that people are just like a more evolved animal? Is there something special that people, do they have, like, is there a spiritual component to a person?
Caring about
Did anyone ever acknowledge
helping
that?
people.
No, that's all part of the training.
Why is he doing that?
So, if you think people are just clever cattle, you can trick them.
Like teaching you how to help people and you're like,
With biological systems, where you can sort of just tinker with it with the right chemical. That's what we are.
That's the belief.
That's the way biological psychiatry is taught.
So it's kind of inevitable you're going to wind up in a place like this, isn't it? Because that's not true. People are not just machines. Right? And no other civilizations ever thought that they were. Sorry, I don't mean to bug you out.
No, but I'm thinking about it. I mean, the only reason that happens is because there's such a massive incentive to recast the human experience in that way.
Yeah. But it's not reality.
No.
At all. No. Yeah. So, what about amphetamines and their ADHD? And the fact that, like, every third kid on your street is taking this stuff. Like, what is ADHD? Are amphetamines an effective way to treat it? What are the long-term effects of those drugs?
Yeah, I mean, ADHD, I want to start here. So there was an awesome piece in New York Magazine recently that summarized a lot of this research. But it really, the thing that most parents care about is usually academic improvement. That's why they want their kids on these medications. They do not improve academics. What they find is that the medications are mostly effective for controlling behavior. So when you have kids who are fidgety, who are having to pay attention to things that are boring, putting them on medications makes them easier to control.
So if you're like a bad teacher.
Yeah,
okay, right.
They're good. They're great. Now, I mean, there is some. I mean, ADHD is interesting because it kind of hits at the at like societal expectations. Like in the US and in a lot of developed countries, academic success is synonymous with your value as a person. You know, if you have to be successful at school to be worthy, and a lot of parents believe that, and so they will push their kids into subjects and university courses because they want to help them, and they think they're helping them by pushing them into these things, and the kids are really struggling and they're not interested in it, and you can put someone on a stimulant and it will make something that's boring or interesting.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so there's also
you can sometimes when you're bored you can take drugs and be less bored.
And
still doing nothing.
That's the same with your studies. And then I think another thing that I believe is going on that really doesn't get enough airtime is that actually a lot of lifestyle problems are leading to ADHD, especially in adults. And the main one being poor diet and insulin resistance. As people become insulin resistant, they end up with more anxiety, more depression, and more brain fog. Essentially, they've broken their body because they've been eating too many refined carbohydrates, added sugars, all of that, and it makes it very hard for neurons to work when the system is disrupted. There's too much insulin, they can't pull energy in. So I think that a lot of people out there have very legitimate, real problems focusing and feeling foggy, but they're not really looking at lifestyle issues that are really clear. And oftentimes people, if they do things, they try ketogenic diets. This is like a really big thing in the mental health space. And they work for a lot of mental health conditions because they reverse insulin resistance and they improve energy, the way your cells work. And so I think the biggest thing that I worry about...
So that it does work. The low carb diet,
yes,
affects your mental health.
Yeah. In a major way, some people even call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes because the correlation between the worsening of diabetes type 2 and blood sugar levels correlates with cognitive decline. I mean, the insulin resistance diabetes all has very strong links to cognitive decline. And so when it comes to ADHD, I think the thing that bothers me the most is that there's actually a lot of reversible things that you can do there. You can, if you have brain fog, it's not that you're just like, you're weak and you're not trying hard enough, you're lazy or something like that. I mean, if you can look at your diet and there's things you can optimize there, if you can get moving, if you can stop smoking cannabis, there's a lot of, and obviously if you can actually try and do work that you genuinely find energizing and that you enjoy, you probably won't need to be on stimulants.
Stop smoking cannabis. I thought cannabis was good for you. It's medicine.
It's a medicine. It's a herb. Yeah. Cannabis is actually this is you're gonna get me on something.
John Woodhart.
Is that cannabis it's a massive gateway drug into the psychiatric industry. It is a huge trigger for mania and schizophrenia. It is completely downplayed by big cannabis because we've decided to legalize it in so many states now. And many people, they'll end up, they'll think, it's harmless, it's this herb, not realizing that the potency has increased like 40 times since what it used to be. And it triggers mania and psychosis. And then the doctors will see them and the doctors will downplay the role of cannabis. And they'll say, oh, you have schizophrenia or you have bipolar, and they put them on an antipsychotic, and then this person just ends up on antipsychotics for a really long period of time when really their issue is that they have a psychotic reaction.
Do you believe that cannabis use can lead to schizophrenia?
I wouldn't say schizophrenia. I would say I believe that cannabis use can cause psychosis, and that psychosis can endure sometimes for like a year or two after they have the psychotic break. Because to say something is schizophrenia makes it sound like, they just had a broken brain. Their brain was broken and it was just inevitable to happen. I've worked with patients who have smoked cannabis, they've had psychotic reactions, and even after they've come off the cannabis, for a period of like a year or two, they've still experienced periodic
see things a
episodes
little
of
differently
psychosis before it
than
fizzles
before.
out. The only way I can understand that is that
But they
that
can't
drug,
step
that
out.
psychotic episode, actually damaged their brain. It was like a big hit, and it took them a couple of years afterwards to fully recover from that. And I've looked into this with many other people who actually work in this space, and they see that when you have a psychotic reaction to cannabis, it can sometimes take months or even a year or two to fully go away. I think doctors misdiagnose that and tell someone, this is a sign you have a broken brain, you have schizophrenia, it's time to put you on the drug.
So you're saying that the drug companies wouldn't necessarily be opposed to marijuana legalization?
No, it's creating customers.
Do you really think that?
I mean, I don't know.
That's really dark.
Well, I don't think they, I don't know if there's like a drug company lobbyist out there just being like, hey, we really want to kind of push this knowingly, but it sure helps them that big cannabis is out there and it is sowing a message that essentially these drugs are safe herbs, these drugs are medicine, when they're Frankenstein drugs now. I mean, they're 40 times more potent than how they used to be.
Ditch weed?
So just to bottom line, as a practicing licensed psychiatrist, would you ever prescribe cannabis to a patient for malpractice?
No, it doesn't make any sense at all.
Okay, chill out, fool.
Would you prescribe SSRIs?
So this is where there's a bit more
about the
nuance here.
Let it be positive.
I think we have to use every tool that we have, and I mean there are a lot of people out there who will say, I mean the fact is these drugs have saved people's lives. I can say that, even with a lot of the concern that the drug effect wears off. But imagine someone who they come in and they're unhappy, and this is rare. You talk to them about their life, some relationship issues going on, and it looks really good, works fine, you've tried to optimize their health, you've done everything that you could, and they're still unhappy. Something is still going on, maybe they have really severe OCD or something like that. I'm not going to sit there and just say, I'm not going to give you any treatment. If I've tried all of the non-drug strategies to help you and you're still suffering, I will give you informed consent about the medication, I will put you on it, and I'll monitor you, and I'll do my best to make sure that you're functioning, and if there's side effects that come up, I'll catch them early. My issue with the medications is that they're used first up without anyone trying, with minimal, with lip service really, to helping people with non-drug means first. But if you've done all of that and it's still not working, I think it makes sense to use a drug to make someone more functional.
So if someone goes to your practice, you said your current practice is helping people get off these drugs.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Just give us the kind of typical patient who approaches you. How long has this person been on the drugs? Why does this person want to get off the drugs? And how does this person get off the drugs?
So a typical person might be a middle-aged woman who was put on a medication during a divorce. She's been on it for maybe 15 years or so, and she's starting to notice that whatever she does with the medications, it's not working. She's gone up on the dose, she's maxed out, she started a new one, and she just feels terrible. She has brain fog, she has low energy, and she feels numb. And she's realized essentially that psychiatry has kind of failed her. That the answer to her solutions aren't really drugs anymore. And so she'll come to us in this state, and what we do is we look at the drugs she's on. Usually she's on several. And then we'll just start to identify which drug is most likely to be causing a problem, the most amount of your problems, and we start there and we slowly taper that off. Some drugs you can taper quite quickly, others can take years to come off, like things like benzos and SSRIs, they're much harder. And so we'll work with patients for several years, slowly untangling the medication regimen, meeting with them very frequently until we ease them off. At the same time, we introduce them to non-drug approaches to managing their mental health. If they need to do dietary modifications, lifestyle changes, if they need to learn some sleep, if we need to look at some of the substances that they're using, we'll use all of our non-drug tools while we're on that medication.
How long does it take people off the drug itself?
So, if you've been on these medications for several years, most people are coming off at around 18 to 24 months.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is what I see, and I want to give a bit of nuance here. It's hard to know why it's so hard for some people to come off. I mean, there are some people, and for reasons I don't understand, their brains are really elastic. They might be able to come off the drug, but they've been on for years really quickly. They have awful withdrawal for a couple of months, and then they come back together. But then there's another group of people that when they try that, the suffering doesn't end, and it's brutal, and the withdrawal doesn't go away, and they have to come back on. And for them, it can take them years to come off. Currently, I have no real way of predicting who is going to have an easy withdrawal and who's going to have a difficult.
It's not related to age, sex, health.
Not in a way that fully accounts for the variability. Like in general, young people have an easier go. In general, people who have been on the drug for a shorter period of time, it kind of skews things, but I've also seen young people who've been on the drug for not that long have a hell of a time coming off as well. And so it's hard for me to predict, but because I've worked with so many people who have developed essentially this brain injury called protracted withdrawal, the way I've come to think about this is everyone needs to come off the medications gradually in a way that doesn't trigger severe withdrawal. And that's kind of the measure. You do like a 10% reduction, you see how they go, okay, you're fine, you do another one. But once they start to develop severe withdrawal, I can slow it down and I do smaller and smaller reductions to get them completely off. So without severe withdrawals, they're not at risk of this neurological injury called protracted withdrawal, and they're able to work and they're able to fulfill their household duties and all of that. That's the way it should be done. So someone remains functional while the taper is going on.
How do they feel when they're off, when they're finally done?
A lot of them feel great, especially if because people come to me because they're dealing with side effects. The drugs are actively harming them. They feel foggy and fatigued, and then to have that monkey off their back, they're not dealing with the side effects. But then they also have that, their self-esteem issues. Some people, they just go, I'm not broken. I don't want to be on a drug. I don't believe there's anything wrong with me. So they love that. They love that they can go and travel and they don't need to worry about losing a prescription or the prescription being stolen from them. And they love not having to line up at the pharmacy. They love not having to worry about the long-term side effects of these medications on their brain. And so many people are really happy.
How does being on SSRIs affect people's relationships?
So the question, it's a question really about how does emotional blunting affect your ability to connect with one another.
Yes, just answer the question.
And so there is a Facebook group out there called Marriage is Destroyed by SSRIs that I think has something like 5,000 people in there. And the stories you hear there are that, we were in a relationship, my spouse was, depressed, they got put on a medication, and so in some instances they would say that the person became emotionally distant, they stopped being intuitive about their partner, they stopped recognizing that there were issues going on, and they became kind of harsh and neglectful. And so I think it can get in the way of empathy. And this is a funny story actually, because my wife and I, we both tried Zoloft. We got it from a friend of ours when we were in our residency, because I wanted to see what it was like. These medications I was prescribing them.
That's what benzodiazepine.
no, this is an SSRI.
Oh, okay.
And so I took an SSRI because I just wanted to see what it was like. And she hated me when I was on Zoloft.
She did?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, she felt like I didn't really care about her anymore. Like she would, we'd be having, she'd be upset about something. I don't know, the kitchen was dirty and I left a mess and she'd be talking to me. And I'd just be like so zoned out, not caring about her emotions, emotionless, not aware, not being able to intuit things. Because in the past, like if I walked into the house and I could pick up that she was upset, walk over to her and say, hey, what's going on? I sense something is wrong. Let's talk about it. That went away. That ability to kind of detect, subtle kind of emotional changes in her went away, and she hated that.
How long were you on?
I think 2 to 3 weeks, and then that was enough of an experience to kind of feel what that was like, and so.
So you took it because you're going to be prescribing it and you wanted to know what it was.
Yeah, and my professors made me feel like this was like the biggest lunatic idea ever.
Seriously?
Yeah. There's like these serious medications, you shouldn't be taking them. I was just like, I need to know what this experience is like if I'm going to prescribe
empathy.
Yeah. So I've taken several psychiatric medications because I think it's really important that I know what they feel like.
Yes, I agree. What else have you taken?
Metazapine, I've taken trazodone,
What are those?
These are antidepressants and sedatives, and I've taken
Do you like going
benzodiazepines.
to electronic
what do you
dance
do?
music shows?
They may be worse, to be honest. The benzos are actually prescribed to me because after, and this is crazy because I'm a drug side effect guy, but this happened to me after my
Life is wild.
yeah. So after my daughter was born, I had just started working at the FDA, and I was a clinician. That's what I was used to, and all of a sudden I was a drug regulator doing reports every day, and that was really stressful to have a new kid and have a new job. And I was also totally overdoing it on stimulants. Like I was drinking a large cup of coffee in the morning, 2 Diet Cokes during the day. I was probably packing 5 Zins in my mouth throughout the day.
First of all, Zins are only for rectal use. I don't know if you should. Okay, should be using alcohol.
Okay,
Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah. And so my sleep deteriorated. I was having a really hard time sleeping with all the pressure and my daughter waking up in the morning. So I was drinking Xanax from a nurse practitioner. And I would just take it once a night, and then very soon it became every other night, and then very soon it became every night. And it slowly wore off, and I started to become more anxious over time. And this is what happens with benzos. I would be sitting there trying to concentrate on my reports, and I'd be getting obsessive thoughts about embarrassing things that had happened in the past. I mean, it was like torturous, they would spring into my mind. And thankfully, I had the foresight to realize that the drug was actually making me more anxious. And I see this with a lot of my patients. I was able to come off fairly quickly. Not many people aren't. But that experience really taught me about how easy it is for these drugs to make you worse. And I mean, if I didn't know what I was doing, I wasn't interested in drug side effects, I could have gone in to see a doctor and they would have said, oh, you've developed an anxiety disorder, here's some Zoloft. And then you get on this prescribing cascade where you got started on one drug, you get a side effect, and you get started on another one, and before you know it, you're taking multiple meds.
So, you say you go into a doctor and tell them this, but now, post-COVID, there's something called telehealth. And my impression is that the bar has dropped, maybe? What is telehealth? And how has it affected this business?
Yeah, I mean, telehealth is essentially being able to get medicines virtually, sometimes without even seeing a clinician, and it has essentially just exacerbated all the worst parts about the American healthcare system. I recently did an investigation on a company, I think it was called Hims, and the female version is For Hers. These are essentially online telehealth companies that sell lifestyle drugs, things like finasteride for male pattern baldness, but they also sell antidepressants. And when I went through
They're drug sellers, they don't do orthopedic surgery or anything.
they're drug sellers, yeah. They like a Silicon Valley I was obviously horrified about this because I think psychiatric drugs are massively overprescribed, and so I wanted to investigate what the oversight was like. And I ended up signing up to make an account.